What happens when a billionaire's black card gets declined in front of a crowd and a little girl steps up to save him? You ever notice how some of the most unbelievable moments in life don't happen in boardrooms or mansions or on fancy stages, but in the simplest places? A grocery store, for example. That's where it all began for Gregory Whitfield, a man who, by most accounts, had it all. It was a Friday afternoon at the Kroger in Arlington, Texas. The place was packed. Shopping carts squeaked across the polished floor, kids begged their parents for candy near the checkout aisles, and cashiers worked with the tired rhythm of people who had scanned thousands of barcodes already that day. In walked Gregory Whitfield. If you didn't know who he was, you'd think he was just another sharp-dressed man with somewhere important to be. Navy blazer, tailored slacks, Italian loafers. His silver hair was combed back, his watch glimmered under the fluorescent lights. But if you followed business news, you'd recognize him instantly. Gregory wasn't just wealthy, he was one of those billionaires who showed up in Forbes lists and cable TV interviews. People noticed. They always did. A couple in the produce section whispered and nudged each other as he passed by. A teenager near the frozen foods pulled out his phone, pretending to text, but really snapping a quick picture. Gregory caught it, gave a tight smile, and kept walking. He wasn't new to this. He pushed his cart with the same focus he once used in negotiating billion-dollar deals. Inside it, bottles of sparkling water, imported cheeses, organic vegetables, a bag of coffee beans from a brand most people couldn't pronounce, and a stack of neatly folded dress shirts still in their packaging. Odd shopping list for a billionaire, but Gregory liked doing some of his errands himself. It reminded him, or so he told himself, that he was still just a man. But when he rolled his cart into the checkout line, it was clear that he wasn't just any man. Heads turned. Conversations quieted down. Some folks tried not to stare, others didn't bother hiding it. The cashier, a young guy named Darren, swallowed nervously as he saw Gregory approach. "Good afternoon, sir," Darren said, trying to sound casual. Gregory gave him a polite nod. "Afternoon." The beeping began. One item after another slid across the scanner. Beep, beep, beep. Gregory stood tall, hands resting on the cart handle, his face calm but distant. He barely blinked as the total climbed higher and higher on the screen. For him, money was never a concern. The line behind him grew. People shifted in place, waiting their turn, but their eyes stayed fixed on him. A billionaire buying groceries in their store. Something about it was fascinating. Finally, Darren announced the total. "That'll be $837.54. Gregory reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black card. The kind of card you don't apply for. It finds you. It gleamed under the harsh store lights as he handed it over without hesitation. Darren slid it into the machine. A moment passed, then another. He frowned slightly and tried again. Gregory raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Beep. A message flashed on the screen. Darren's throat tightened. Sir?" Darren's voice dropped. "It's saying declined." For the first time that day, Gregory's expression shifted. He straightened, his voice cool but edged. "Run it again." Darren nodded quickly and swiped the card a second time. Same result. He tried once more, hoping maybe the machine was acting up, but the word glared back at him. Declined. Gregory exhaled slowly through his nose. Behind him, the murmurs started. A woman whispered to her husband. A teenager stifled a laugh. Someone raised their phone a little higher, pretending to scroll, but actually recording. Gregory's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, his voice low enough for only Darren to hear. "This card has more money on it than this store makes in a year. Try again." But the machine didn't care who Gregory Whitfield was. It didn't care about billions, or magazine covers, or reputations. The answer stayed the same, declined. And just like that, the room shifted. Power drained from Gregory's presence, and in its place was something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Humiliation. But the real story didn't start with Gregory's embarrassment. It started with who was watching just a few feet behind him. The cashier shifted uncomfortably, aware that every second felt like an eternity for the man in front of him. Gregory's face remained stone-like, but his eyes burned with a sharpness that could cut glass. He was used to control, to silence, to the kind of authority that made other men shrink. Yet here, at a grocery checkout line in Arlington, Texas, none of that mattered. The screen glowed with a single cruel word: declined. "Sir, maybe it's the machine," Darren offered, desperate to ease the tension. He looked around nervously, noticing the cluster of eyes fixed on them. A woman 2 aisles over leaned her elbow on her cart, her toddler fussing as she tried to get a better look. 2 high school boys near the self-checkout elbowed each other, smirking as they whispered. Gregory cleared his throat, straightened his blazer, and pulled out another card, a platinum one this time. He tossed it onto the counter with just enough force to make it clear. This was not a man to be laughed at. "Try this one," Gregory said flatly. Darren grabbed it, slid it through the reader, and prayed it would go through. Beep. Processing, processing. Then once again the word no one expected, declined. The whispers grew louder. "You seeing this?" someone muttered. "No way, man. That's Gregory Whitfield," another whispered back. "Bro's got billions and can't pay for groceries?" Gregory's ears caught every syllable. He could feel the weight of their stares pressing down on him, the way predators circle prey when they smell weakness. But Gregory was no prey. He clenched his jaw and pulled out his phone, tapping furiously. "This has to be a mistake," he muttered. "My accounts are fine." He turned the phone screen toward Darren. "Do you see this balance? Do you? That's not an error. That's your machine." Darren glanced at the screen but quickly looked away. The last thing he wanted was to get tangled up in billionaire business. "Sir, Look, I can call the manager if you'd like. Maybe she can override something." "Do it," Gregory snapped. From the corner of the store, the manager hustled over. A middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Maria. She approached cautiously, like someone walking into a storm they couldn't avoid. "Is there an issue here?" Maria asked, glancing between Gregory and the frozen screen. Gregory didn't hesitate. "Yes, there's an issue. Your system is broken. My card is being declined when there is no reason it should be." Maria leaned over, studying the register. "Sometimes banks flag large purchases. It could be a security block." Gregory scoffed. "This is less than $1,000. That's not a large purchase." He shook his head, his voice rising. "Do you know who I am?" Maria held his gaze. She didn't flinch, though the room around them buzzed with anticipation. "Yes, sir, I do. But right now, you're a customer, and I need a payment method that works." For the first time in years, Gregory had no quick fix, no clever comeback. He had cash, sure, but only a few bills tucked into his wallet, hardly enough to cover his overflowing cart. He could feel the laughter just below the surface of the crowd, waiting for him to crack. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his phone again, trying to call his personal banker. Straight to voicemail. He dialed again. Still voicemail. He cursed under his breath, raking a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Behind him, the line grew restless. A man sighed loudly. Someone muttered, "Hurry up, some of us don't have all day." Another voice chuckled, "Guess money can't buy everything, huh?" Gregory turned sharply, glaring at the line. "Quiet." The command shot out like lightning. For a moment, silence returned, but it didn't last. The whispers started up again, softer now, but still there. The manager crossed her arms. "Sir, do you have another form of payment? Cash, maybe?" Gregory's pride and reality clashed violently inside him. He had never felt so exposed, so ordinary, so powerless. But the most surprising reaction didn't come from Gregory or the crowd. It came from someone standing just a few feet behind him, small in stature, but far greater in courage. The checkout lane had turned into a stage, and Gregory Whitfield was the unwilling star. Every eye in the store seemed locked on him. His reputation, his billions, his name, none of it mattered in this moment. All people saw was a man who couldn't pay for his groceries. The tension spread like wildfire. 2 teenagers angled their phones higher, pretending to browse, but recording every second. A mother rocked her crying baby while muttering under her breath, "Some of us don't have time for this drama." An elderly man leaned heavily on his cane, squinting as if he couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Gregory could feel the heat rising in his chest. He wasn't used to being on display this way, not like this. Usually, people stared at him with awe, respect, even envy. But now, their eyes carried something else: amusement, curiosity, judgment. Maria, the manager, tried to keep things moving. She gestured to another cashier to open up a different lane. "Folks, if you'd like, we can take you over here," she called out, but hardly anyone moved. They stayed rooted, unwilling to miss the spectacle, because that's what it had become, a spectacle. Gregory pinched the bridge of his nose. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, though loud enough for people around him to hear. "A technical error, and suddenly it's a circus." A man in line behind him let out a low laugh. "Funny how that works. When it happens to us regular folks, nobody cares. But when it happens to you—" He trailed off, shaking his head. Gregory spun around, eyes narrowing. "What's your point?" The man shrugged, his voice casual but cutting. "Point is, welcome to the real world." The crowd chuckled softly, not cruel, but knowing, shared. They'd all been there before. Cards declined, bills unpaid, moments of public embarrassment. For them, it was ordinary. For him, it was unthinkable. Darren, the cashier, cleared his throat nervously. Sir, maybe if you call the bank—" "I already tried," Gregory snapped. His voice cracked the air like a whip. Darren flinched. "Voicemail twice." The silence after was heavy, broken only by the beeps of other registers in the distance. From behind, a soft child's voice whispered, "Grandma, why is he mad?" A grandmotherly voice responded gently, "Because sometimes grown-ups don't like being told no, baby." Gregory heard it. It stung more than he expected. He looked down at the cart, at the expensive cheeses, the imported coffee, the clothes he didn't really need. Suddenly, they felt like evidence. Evidence of a man desperate to prove he was more than just rich. Evidence of pride. The longer he stood there, the smaller he felt. He thought about abandoning the cart altogether, just walking out. But he couldn't. That would mean accepting defeat. And Gregory Whitfield didn't lose, not in business, not in life. Maria lowered her voice, leaning closer. "Mr. Whitfield, maybe you should step aside for a moment. Call your assistant or someone who can—" "I don't need anyone," Gregory interrupted sharply. His pride was louder than his reason. The crowd stirred again. A woman whispered, "Guess money doesn't buy humility." Another replied, "Sure doesn't buy class." Gregory's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He wanted to shout, to remind them all of who he was, of everything he'd built. But what good would it do? The more he fought, the more powerless he looked. He glanced at Darren, who still held the rejected black card. It looked ordinary now, just plastic and numbers, no different from anyone else's. Gregory's mouth felt dry. "Try it one more time," he said quietly, almost pleading. Darren nodded, slid it in, and everyone leaned forward, waiting, processing. Then, the same word appeared again, declined. And just like that, the whispers turned into full conversations. "What's he gonna do now? You think he really doesn't have money? Maybe it's karma." Gregory lowered his head, staring at the floor. He had never felt so small, so ordinary, so human. But before he could make his next move, a small figure behind him decided to step forward and change the entire story. Amid the stares, the whispers, and Gregory's humiliation, a tiny hand tugged at a sleeve. Not his, but her grandmother's. "Grandma," whispered a little girl with dark brown skin and braids tied neatly with colorful beads. She was holding a small cardboard box of crayons, the kind that costs less than $2. Her name was Zariah Bennett, and though her voice was quiet, her eyes carried the kind of certainty adults often lose with age. Her grandmother, Alma Bennett, looked down at her. Alma was a retired school teacher, the kind of woman who always carried tissues in her purse and spoke with a mix of firmness and kindness that made children listen. She had seen many things in her 70 years, but what she was watching now, one of the richest men in Texas struggling at a grocery checkout, was something she couldn't quite wrap her head around. "What is it, baby?" Alma asked softly. Zariah pointed at Gregory. "Why is he sad?" Alma hesitated. She could see Gregory's stiff shoulders, the way he avoided everyone's gaze, the way pride was battling shame inside him. Because sometimes, even people who look strong have hard moments. "But he's got money," Zariah said, her voice innocent, puzzled. "Why can't he just pay?" Alma gave a small sigh. "Life doesn't always work the way you think it should." Gregory, though he didn't turn around, heard every word. His chest tightened. To hear a child talk about him like that, confused, almost pitying, was harder than any headline or rumor he'd ever faced. Zariah shifted on her feet, still staring. She had seen grown-ups argue, she had seen her classmates cry, but she had never seen someone so important look so lost. To her, money was magic. If you had it, you never had problems. That was how she thought the world worked. And yet, here he was, stuck like everyone else. "Grandma," she said again, tugging harder this time. "Can I help him?" Alma blinked, startled. "Help him? Baby, you don't have—" She stopped, realizing what Zariah meant. Her heart swelled at the thought, but also ached. "Sweetheart, he doesn't need your help. He has more than enough." "But he don't look like it," Zariah whispered, frowning. She gripped her crayon box with both hands, as if holding treasure. Alma wanted to protest, to tell her granddaughter that billionaires didn't need saving. But there was something about the determination in Zariah's eyes, something pure, something brave. Meanwhile, Gregory was locked in his own silent war. His phone screen glared at him with no returned calls, no quick solutions. His world, built on control and power, had shrunk to a grocery store aisle filled with strangers watching him squirm. He felt cornered, and then, soft footsteps. He barely noticed at first, but when he heard the small voice beside him, he turned, startled. "Mister," Zariah said, her voice clear despite its smallness. "You can use mine." For a moment, Gregory didn't process it. He looked down at her, at the crayon box she was clutching, and then at the dollar bills she was pulling from her tiny pocket. 2 crumpled ones, folded neatly, her savings for the week. The crowd hushed instantly. The murmurs, the whispers, the laughter, all of it faded as every eye turned not to Gregory anymore, but to the little girl with braids and bright eyes, offering what little she had. Alma stepped forward quickly, her voice firm but gentle. "Zariah, baby, you don't need to." But Zariah stood her ground, holding out the bills with both hands, her expression serious. "It's okay, Grandma. He needs help." Gregory stared at her, his throat tightening. Billion-dollar deals, international press, political connections, none of it had ever left him speechless like this. The cashier froze, unsure of what to do. Maria, the manager, covered her mouth in disbelief. And the rest of the store stood in complete silence, watching a moment so unlikely it felt like something out of a dream. But it was real, right there, between a billionaire and a little girl with crayons. But no one knew yet what Gregory would do next, whether his pride would push her away, or whether this unthinkable act would break something open inside him. The silence around the checkout lane was unlike anything Gregory Whitfield had ever experienced. For a man used to applause, boardroom silence, or the clinking of glasses at galas, this kind of silence was deafening. Every single person in that store seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for his response. Gregory's eyes flicked from the crumpled bills in Zariah's tiny hand to her face. Her braids clicked softly as she tilted her head, waiting. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't playing, she was serious. You're offering me this?" Gregory finally asked, his voice low, almost shaky. Zariah nodded. "Yes, mister. So you can pay." Her grandmother, Alma, placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Zariah, honey, Mr. Whitfield doesn't need—" But Zariah interrupted, her voice clear, carrying across the hushed store. "Everybody needs help sometimes." The word struck Gregory harder than he expected. Everybody needs help sometimes. How long had it been since anyone had dared to say that to him? People catered to him, yes. People obeyed him, feared him, respected him. But help? No. Help was for the weak, the vulnerable. The word didn't exist in his world. He swallowed, his throat tight. "That's very kind of you," he managed, his polished tone cracking under the weight of something he hadn't felt in years. Humility. The crowd leaned closer, their curiosity mixing with awe. Some smiled softly, others blinked back tears, and a few muttered to themselves about how unbelievable this was. Alma crouched down to meet her granddaughter's eyes. "Sweetheart, I know your heart is in the right place, but sometimes people need to figure things out on their own. Mr. Whitfield is, well, he's a man who has plenty of ways to take care of himself." "But Grandma," Zariah whispered, "nobody else helped him. They just laughed." That stopped Gregory cold. She was right. The people around him, the ones recording, whispering, mocking, none of them had stepped forward. They only watched. And this little girl, with $2 and a box of crayons, had done more than all of them combined. Gregory crouched down so he was eye level with her. His expensive blazer creased awkwardly, but he didn't care. For once, he didn't care about appearances. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Zariah," she said. "Well, Zariah," Gregory said, "you may not know this, but what you just did, that's one of the bravest things I've ever seen." Zariah smiled faintly, still holding out her $2 bills. "So, do you want it?" Gregory paused. His pride screamed, say no. His ego begged him to brush it off, to remind everyone who he was. But something deeper, something long buried under years of wealth and power, whispered, "Say yes." He reached out slowly and took the bills from her tiny hand. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Gregory Whitfield, the billionaire, had just accepted help from a child. He held the crumpled bills delicately, as though they were made of glass. He looked back at her. "Thank you, Zariah. You've just given me something money can't buy." The line of people behind them stood stunned. The teenagers lowered their phones for the first time. The mother with the baby nodded to herself. Even Maria, the manager, blinked rapidly, her tough demeanor cracking. Darren, the cashier, cleared his throat, unsure of what to do next. Sir, do you want me to put this toward the bill?" Gregory glanced at the cart overflowing with expensive items. He looked back at Zariah's crayons. Then he exhaled deeply and shook his head. "No," Gregory said quietly. "Not this cart. Not today." The crowd exchanged puzzled glances. Gregory set the crumpled bills gently on the counter. "But this means more than every card I own." He looked at Zariah again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for reminding me what really matters." The little girl grinned, content, as if she understood more than the adults around her. But even after the moment softened, Gregory wasn't free of the storm inside him. Accepting help was one thing. Admitting what it meant for his life was another battle entirely. Gregory stood there, still crouched beside Zariah, holding those two wrinkled bills like they were worth more than gold. For a man who once closed deals in skyscrapers with a single signature, the weight of $2 felt strangely heavy. He didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or walk out of the store and never look back. The crowd slowly went back to murmuring, their earlier whispers shifting into something softer, almost reverent. But the phones were still out. He knew this moment was already online. Tomorrow, the headlines would scream, "Billionaire brought to his knees by little girl." The thought made his stomach churn. Alma straightened, her voice steady. "Mr. Whitfield, she didn't mean to embarrass you. She only wanted to help." Gregory shook his head. "No, she didn't embarrass me. She reminded me." "Reminded you of what?" Alma asked, her tone curious but cautious. He hesitated. The words tasted bitter, but they were true. "That I'm human." The sentence hung in the air. For years, Gregory had built a wall of steel around himself. His wealth was armor, his reputation a shield. But in that checkout lane, stripped of both, he saw what he had become, a man terrified of weakness. He straightened, slipping the bills carefully into his pocket as though he couldn't bear to lose them. His chest tightened, not from anger this time, but something else. Guilt. Regret. A gnawing awareness that maybe, somewhere along the way, he had forgotten the very things that made life worth living. Darren, still hovering at the register, tried to lighten the tension. "Sir, maybe it's just a glitch with the bank. Happens sometimes." Gregory forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "A glitch, yes, but maybe not the kind you think." The cashier blinked, unsure how to respond. Gregory turned back toward Zariah. "You said everybody needs help sometimes. Do you really believe that?" Zariah nodded without hesitation. "Yes. My teacher says even superheroes need friends." Her words landed like a punch. He thought about all the years he had spent alone in his mansion, surrounded by people but connected to no one. Assistants, lawyers, investors. They were employees, not friends. And in that moment, the truth hit him harder than the crowd's laughter ever could. He had built an empire, but starved his soul. Alma tilted her head, studying him. "Seems to me, Mr. Whitfield, this was less about your card and more about your pride." Gregory met her gaze, and for once he didn't argue. He nodded slowly. "You might be right." The admission felt foreign, almost painful, but it was real. The crowd began thinning, some satisfied with what they'd witnessed, others too uncomfortable to linger. But those who stayed because they sensed something bigger happening. A man confronting himself in public, stripped bare by the honesty of a child. Gregory rubbed his forehead, trying to process the storm inside him. "Do you know what the worst part is?" he said aloud, not to anyone in particular. "I wasn't even buying food I needed. Half of this," he gestured at the cart, "is just for show. To remind myself that I could. To remind everyone else that I could." The confession surprised even him. His voice cracked with it, but strangely he felt lighter. Alma gave a knowing smile. "Well, maybe today was the reminder you didn't expect." Zariah tilted her head, confused. "So, you're not mad anymore?" Gregory crouched down again, this time without hesitation. "No, sweetheart, I'm not mad. I'm grateful." The words were true. He had spent years measuring gratitude in stocks, assets, and accolades, but here he was, feeling more thankful for 2 wrinkled bills and a box of crayons than he ever had for his billions. But gratitude alone wouldn't fix the mess inside him. Gregory still had to face what came next, the conversations, the questions, and the choice between clinging to pride or embracing change. The crowd had thinned, but the air was still heavy with curiosity. A few people lingered nearby, pretending to browse the candy racks, while really listening to every word. Gregory could feel the weight of their attention, but for once he didn't care. He turned fully toward Alma and Zariah, the 2 strangers who had just shifted his entire world in a matter of minutes. "Tell me something," Gregory said, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "Why would you do that? Why would you give me your money?" Zariah shrugged, her braids bouncing. "Because you looked sad, and Grandma says, when someone looks sad, you help if you can." Gregory's chest tightened. He had spent decades making sure no one ever saw him sad. He had hidden it behind wealth, status, and control. But this child had seen through all of it in a matter of seconds. Alma stepped in, her tone steady but kind. "Mr. Whitfield, most people see you as untouchable. They think men like you don't struggle. Maybe that's why this feels so shocking. But children, they don't see money or status. They see people." Gregory exhaled, running a hand over his face. "That may be the most honest thing I've heard in years." From behind, one of the men who had been smirking earlier spoke up. His voice was louder now, braver in the thinned crowd. "So what now, huh? You gonna take her money and just walk out? That's what billionaires do, isn't it? Take and leave." The words cut through the store like a knife. Heads turned. Gregory slowly stood, his posture stiff, but his eyes calm. For the first time, he didn't lash out. "No," Gregory said firmly, "that's not what I'm going to do." He reached into his pocket, pulled out the $2 bills Zariah had given him, and held them high enough for everyone to see. "These $2 are worth more than every million I've ever made, because they came with something I forgot how to earn, trust." The man scoffed. "Pretty words, but you'll go back to your mansion, your cars, and this won't matter tomorrow." Gregory's eyes narrowed. "You're wrong." His voice didn't rise, but it carried. "Because I can't buy back what just happened. No amount of money could force a child to care about me. No amount of money could force me to feel what I just felt. And if I walk away unchanged, then I don't deserve the life I have." The man fell silent. So did everyone else. Gregory turned back to Zariah. He crouched again, ignoring how out of place he looked doing it in his tailored suit. "You said superheroes need friends, right?" Zariah nodded. "Yes, they can't do everything alone." Gregory smiled faintly. "Then maybe I've been pretending to be a superhero without realizing I was really just lonely." Alma's eyes softened. "Maybe that's why this happened today. To remind you that we all need each other, no matter how high up we think we are." Gregory nodded slowly, the truth settling into his chest like a weight that felt both heavy and freeing. "You're right. All these years, I thought needing people made me weak. But maybe needing people is what makes us strong." The store was quiet again, but this time it wasn't judgmental silence. It was thoughtful, reflective. People weren't staring at Gregory anymore. They were thinking about themselves, about their own pride, their own walls. Gregory stood tall once more, but he didn't feel taller because of pride. He felt taller because, for the first time in years, he was honest with himself. But words were one thing. What Gregory chose to do next would prove whether he truly meant them, or whether this moment would fade like any other scandal in his life. The store had returned to its rhythm, scanners beeping, carts rolling, but the atmosphere around Lane 5 remained different. Something had shifted there. People weren't just customers anymore. They were witnesses to a moment that would stay with them. Gregory placed a hand over the crumpled bills in his pocket, then turned back to the cart, stacked with his unnecessary purchases. The imported cheeses, the overpriced coffee, the shirts he didn't really need. For the first time, he saw them for what they were, symbols of ego. He looked at Darren, the nervous cashier. "Cancel the order. All of it." The young man blinked. "All of it, sir?" Gregory nodded. "Every last item. I don't need this cart. What I need, I already have." His eyes flicked towards Zariah. The crowd murmured, not mocking this time, but surprised, impressed even. Alma raised an eyebrow. "So, what are you going to do now, Mr. Whitfield?" Gregory thought for a moment. Then, with a clarity he hadn't felt in years, he answered, "I'm going to start listening, really listening. Not to bankers or shareholders, to people, to children, to strangers in grocery stores who remind me what it means to be human." Zariah smiled, clutching her crayons. "So, you're not sad anymore?" Gregory crouched down one last time, looking her in the eye. "Not anymore, because you reminded me of something I forgot. Everybody needs help sometimes, even billionaires." She grinned wide, satisfied with his answer. Gregory turned back to the manager. "Maria, how much would it cost to cover the groceries for the people in line behind me?" Maria blinked, caught off guard. Maybe a few $100s total?" Gregory nodded. "Ring it up, I'll take care of it, with cash." The crowd gasped softly. A man at the end of the line whispered, "Did he just—" Another woman clutched her chest, whispering to her friend, "I didn't see that coming." Gregory reached into his wallet and pulled out several crisp bills, his last fallback, the emergency cash he always carried. For once, it didn't feel like scraps compared to his wealth. It felt like purpose. The cashier processed the payments, and one by one, people thanked Gregory as they left. But Gregory shook his head each time. "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank her." He nodded towards Zariah. "She's the one who taught me today." Alma squeezed her granddaughter's shoulder, pride glowing in her eyes. Sometimes, the smallest voices teach the biggest lessons. Gregory exhaled deeply. He felt lighter, as though a burden had slipped from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about money, power, or reputation. He was thinking about connection, about humility, about the kind of wealth that can't be measured in numbers. As he left the store, the phones were still out, still recording. But Gregory didn't mind. For once, he didn't fear the headlines. Let them write what they wanted. Maybe, just maybe, this time the story would help someone else. He walked out into the Texas sun, glancing once more at Zaria, who waved at him with her crayon-stained fingers. He waved back, smiling genuinely. No cameras, no masks, just a man reminded of who he really was. And as he stepped into his car, he whispered to himself, "Everybody needs help sometimes. Everybody." Life doesn't always humble us in boardrooms or mansions. Sometimes, it happens in grocery store checkout lines, when a little girl with nothing to prove shows us what really matters. The lesson? Pride isolates us. Humility connects us. And true wealth isn't measured by what's in your bank account, but by the compassion in your heart. So, if you take anything away from Gregory Whitfield's story, let it be this. Don't be too proud to accept help, and don't ever think you're too small to make a difference. Because sometimes, the smallest hands hold the greatest power to change the world. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs reminding that kindness still exists. And remember, helping someone doesn't always cost much, but its impact is priceless.